In a recent experiment, researchers went to a health club and asked a simple question.
You're gonna live in the woods for 2 days and 2 nights. You can have food or water, but not both. Which would you rather have, food or water?
Food. I'd say food.
Okay, circle that.
Some of the people were asked this question before they worked out. Some were asked after they'd worked out. And when they were asked made a huge difference in how they answered. In fact, people were 50% more likely to say water if they'd just finished working out than if they were about to start.
Water.
Definitely water.
Why? People were thirsty after exercising, and because they were thirsty now, they imagined being thirsty in the future. This is something our brains do all the time. When we think about how we'll feel in the future, our thoughts are shaped by how we feel in the present. It's as if our brains can't believe that we might feel differently later than we do now. That's not the only thing our brains can't quite believe. We all know that feelings inevitably change over time, that new love fades, that fresh wounds heal. And yet, when we imagine our future joys and our future sorrows, we tend not to think about how time will change them.
We sure do have the compelling intuition that somehow improving our life circumstances, our situations, whether it has to do with relationships or jobs or health, that's going to make us happier. And the truth is that it does make us happier, but it doesn't make us happier for as long or as intensely as we think it would.
Psychologist Sonia Lubomirsky suggests that we're sadly mistaken when we expect that the things that make us happy for a day will make us happy for a lifetime.
It's a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation, which means that human beings basically are just incredibly good at getting used to, getting accustomed to adapting positive changes, especially in their lives, like the new car or the new house. And so that's one of the reasons that we keep sort of buying more stuff, is that we get the handbag that gives us a boost, it wears off, and then we get a new handbag.
Adaptation affects our experience of both good things and bad things in ways that we find difficult to anticipate. This is something my colleagues and I have been studying in the lab. And we'd be very happy to give you one as a gift for participating in the experiment. Which one would you like to have? In one experiment, we brought people into a room filled with art posters and offered to give them one. We told half of the participants that their decision was irreversible, and that once they'd made it, they could never change their minds. We told the other half that they could exchange the poster they chose for a different poster anytime they wanted. After making their choices, we asked both groups to rank their posters. And guess what? The people who knew they couldn't exchange their posters liked them more than the people who knew they could. Why? Because they had no choice. And so they adapted. The lesson of this study was clear. People find ways to like things when they're stuck with them. When we can't change our circumstances, we change the way we think about those circumstances. And yet, most of us don't seem to realize this will happen.
There's a part of me that is the most hyper person ever. The minute I was born, I was running. I was like a Red Bull baby.
Francesco Clark was a young man with big dreams when he moved to New York City to take a job in publishing.
It was very exciting. It was movies, it was television, it was celebrities, it was everything that 22-year-old graduating college kind of dreams of.
Then, in the blink of an eye, his life was forever transformed.
I had a summer rental, and I get to the house and there was a pool, and it was a nice summer day, so naturally I wanted to go swimming. The second that I dove into the pool, my chin hit the bottom and my head snapped back. In 1 millisecond, my life changed completely. I was told I was going to die 3 times that night. I couldn't breathe on my own. I was on a ventilator. I had a tube going down my mouth.
Francesco's doctors said that he'd never be able to move again.
I was depressed after the accident. That's a pretty big change of life. To then suddenly not be able to eat on your own or not be able to brush your teeth or to go to the bathroom. It's you know, there's a sense of embarrassment that comes with it at first. When you can't feed yourself, when you can't scratch your nose, it can drive you crazy. So I just wanted to fix it. I just wanted to, you know, show them that I was going to get better. I had no choice. I mean, what are you going to do? You're just going to sit? You're just going to lay in bed and wither away? I didn't want to do that. I wanted to live. I started to feel better. It wasn't a specific day and it wasn't a specific time, but I realized that it wasn't about my injury anymore, and it wasn't about this metal frame that I sit on. It was more about, what do I want to do with my life?
After his accident, Francesco moved back in with his parents and began devoting long hours to a grueling routine of physical therapy.
I do very intensive physical therapy every day. I pedal this special bike with my arms and my legs. I sit up. I am relearning how to crawl. When I started to move my arms again, you know, 6 months before, you know, I can't move my arm. That sucks. But then moving it again makes you realize, oh my God, you know, this is incredible. I can't believe I'm starting to use my wrist. I can't believe I'm moving my arm. I mean, you're moving your arm. When you don't have a spinal cord injury, you don't think about, God, I'm so thankful that I can breathe out of my left lung. I mean, you never think about that.
In the years since, Francesco has learned to move a lot more than just his body.
I started a skincare line called Clark's Botanicals. That started because of my injury. I lost the ability to sweat. It looked like I had specks of sand under each pore, and it was red, it was flaky, it was gray, it was sensitive, it looked like it was aging. I was kind of like, well, I've tried everything prescription, I've tried everything over the counter. I started to look at essential oils and botanical extracts. So I had these like ugly little vials that I would use, and then my sister started using it, and then my mom started using it, and then my dad's patient started using it. And then I was kind of like, hold on, you know, this isn't like, I'm just making this in the kitchen, I don't know what I'm doing. So it was very much an organic evolution of my injury.
Today, Francesco's products are sold all over the world, and he has the schedule of a busy CEO, running his own firm, writing a book, and working with the Christopher Reeve Foundation as an advocate for people with disabilities.
I'm very happy now. I love every aspect of my life, from work to my friends, to being with my family, to thinking about living an independent life. I'm still pretty much exactly who I was before. I laugh at the same jokes. I love the same movies. I have the same sense of curiosity, but I think that everything is more, I don't know. I'm just as stupid as I was before. It's just that I've learned more about myself.
The ability to bounce back is admirable, but it isn't unusual. People who suffer a wide range of traumas and tragedies tend to recover more quickly than they themselves would have predicted. Yes, they're sad, they're miserable, they're even devastated for a while. But studies show that most people end up being as happy or nearly as happy as they were before. Resilience isn't rare. In fact, it's very common.
There is some set point to happiness that you tend to return toward, and for some people it's very happy, and for other people it's mildly happy. And unfortunately for a few people it may not be happy. But the set point is good in the sense that when we have something terrible in our life happen to us, we get very depressed, we get less satisfied with our life, but slowly over time we come back toward that set point.
This process is critical to human happiness. But how do we do it? And why do some of us do it so much more easily than others? For more than 15 years, Dr. Dennis Charney has been studying people who've shown exceptional resilience after trauma. From survivors of natural disasters, to prisoners of war, to the firemen who responded when the World Trade Center was attacked on September 11th.
It was fascinating to deal with resilient individuals because when you met them, you looked at them and thought, well, how did you do this? You start thinking, could I have done that? How did they do it?
One of Charney's most interesting subjects was Bob Shoemaker, a former Navy pilot.
I grew up on a farm in western Pennsylvania, and my parents were middle class, so I consider myself fairly average. But average people get thrown into extraordinary situations.
Bob's ordeal began in 1965 when he was assigned to combat duty in Vietnam. He'd just been married and had a son. Then suddenly, life as he knew it came to an end.
The mission I was on was just north of the demilitarized zone that separated North Vietnam from South Vietnam. We were really low, and I pulled out right over a flak site, and they managed to hit me in the tail section, and the plane flipped upside down, and I ejected, and the parachute fortunately opened, but opened only 35 feet above the ground, and so I broke my back as I landed. That was it. They got me, they bound me, had handcuffs on me behind my back and marched me off.
For 8 years, Shoemaker was shuttled between North Vietnamese prisons, including the infamous Hanoi Hilton, where he was brutally tortured.
The really worst technique was what we call the rope treatment, where they would tie a rope from your handcuffs up over your shoulders and down to your feet, and they would tighten this thing up so that eventually your head would reach your feet. And you think it can't happen, particularly when your knees are straight, but it was excruciating. And then they jammed an iron bar down my throat to keep me from screaming. So that was the technique that would get you to condemn your own grandmother if you had to.
The torture Shoemaker endured was not just physical. For almost 3 years, he was held in solitary confinement.
There were 11 of us in cells and no windows and a solitary light bulb hanging down that burned 24 hours a day.
To deal with his isolation, Shoemaker imagined the house that he would build for his young family if he ever returned.
I'm almost embarrassed to admit to you that there would be days when I would spend maybe 10 or 12 hours just thinking about how many bricks were in this house. I knew that there were, say, 5,227 nails in the thing and so many board feet of lumber. I'd spend a year and a half designing the perfect house, and then one day I'd say, well, what would happen if I moved the fireplace from this room to that room? It'd send me back to square one, and I'd redesign the thing.
Although Shoemaker was physically isolated from the other prisoners, together they created an ingenious form of communication.
We developed a tap code in which the alphabet was arranged in a square that had 5 rows and 5 columns. You'd say, that's the second row, second column, this is G. That's first row, second column B, and U is fourth row, fifth column is the U, so GBU is God bless you. So the tap code really kept our spirits alive, our hopes alive, our dreams. And so we transmitted things like French lessons through the wall and music lessons and how to fix a television set and biology lessons. So we spent a lot of time on the wall.
These conversations were crucial to Shoemaker's survival, and they became a focus of Dennis Charney's research.
Social support is a key factor in becoming a resilient individual. You can't do it alone. You need other people. I think the tap code experience of the POWs is among the most important lessons. And we use the phrase that everybody needs a tap code. Everybody needs a way of communicating with other people to establish friendships that are supportive, to establish relationships that provide you a guidepost as you get through tough times.
Charney also discovered that highly resilient people tended to share some other qualities as well. They tended to have strong religious or moral beliefs, strong role models, and a strong streak of optimism.
It was not an unrealistic optimism. They were able to accurately apprise themselves of what they were facing. So it wasn't denial. They knew that they had been traumatized or they were facing a very difficult situation. But they had an ability to be optimistic that somehow that they would prevail.
I only received 7 letters in 8 years, and the letters were occasionally were pessimistic, like telling me my mother had suddenly died and things like that. And you just have to be able to, just suck it up and reach down somewhere in your soul and come out with the wherewithal to overcome the present circumstances and be upbeat and get on with it.
After 8 years of captivity, Bob Shoemaker was finally released, his spirit unbroken by the horrors he endured. The first thing he did was call his wife.
I wondered who this man was. I didn't know him very much. We had a very short courtship. Our baby was born just 5 weeks before Bob was shot down and captured. I remembered this phone call saying, "Hi, honey," and that literally erased 8 years of time. It's hard to explain that, but that was the person I knew. And that was the person that returned home.
Shoemaker had done more than just survive. In his view, he had grown.
Well, I suppose one way of looking at 8 years of imprisonment is to say, hey, that's just wasted time. Have to put that behind me. It's unfortunate. But paradoxically, I gained something out of this 8 years of experience.
In the years after his release, Shoemaker became a rear admiral, a college professor, a devoted husband and father. And he turned the house that he'd so often imagined into a reality.
It was something in my soul I just had to get out, and see the fulfillment. I wanted a house that had a lot of openness to it, and I think that was probably as a result of my being confined without windows or anything. So the house I designed has a lot of glass. I was deprived of freedom for such a long time. I think I really cherish freedom more than most people do now.
Bob, like almost all the other POWs that we interviewed and got to know very well, said that to the following question: if you could have eliminated the POW experience from your life, would you do so? In other words, you could have just wiped that out. It never happened. And Bob, like many of the others, said no, because I learned things about myself during that experience. And I learned tools, psychological tools in which to handle my life that I probably could never learn in any other way. And so it stood me in good stead for the rest of my life.
Being a prisoner really focuses on what's essential in life. And there are a lot of things that we can do without and still be happy.
The key lessons from Bob Shoemaker's story are that inside almost all of us is the capacity to overcome the most horrific of stresses in our life and even ultimately learn from that stress and thrive and grow as a person.
You learn resilience by falling down and getting back up again. And as you fall down and get back up again, you say, oh my God, I'm back up again. The setback or the failure that I thought I would never recover from, in fact, I've recovered from perfectly well, which means that I can do that again.
My resilience has been slowly learning to trust that whatever path I take can be positive. Even the worst decisions I've made have had, positive ramifications if I choose to learn from them.
Well, I want to make sure that people know that I'm happy that I had a messed up childhood, that I'm glad I was damaged, because it made me a better actor, it made me a better writer, it made me a better creator. So I thank my family for that. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Then I would have, but not now.
Human beings have a talent for adapting, a talent for finding happiness where we'd least expect it. But if we can adapt to a lifetime in a wheelchair or a decade in prison, then why can't we adapt to the ordinary misfortunes of everyday life? The answer is that adaptation is something the mind does when there's nothing else it can do. We adapt to misfortunes when we know we can't change them. But when we stand a fighting chance, we fight. And that's why we struggle so much with temporary misfortunes.